Imagine this for a moment. You walk into a restaurant where a birthday dinner is already in full swing. A long table stretches across the room, filled with maybe 10 or 12 people. Plates are half full, drinks are being refilled, and the air is warm with conversation and laughter. At first glance, everything feels normal, familiar even. But if you pay a little closer attention, you start to notice something subtle. At one end of the table, there's someone who keeps reaching for his phone. Not constantly, not in an obvious way, but often enough that it stands out. He adjusts the angle of his plate before taking a photo. He leans back slightly to capture a quick video of everyone laughing. He checks the screen almost immediately after posting, scrolling, refreshing, watching for reactions. It's not that he's disconnected. He still laughs at jokes, still participates. But part of his attention always seems to be somewhere else. Wink, yes, just slightly outside the moment. Across from him, there's another person. No phone on the table. No interruptions. He's fully engaged in the conversation, leaning in when someone speaks, maintaining eye contact, asking small follow-up questions that show he's actually listening. At one point, in the middle of the noise and overlapping voices, he turns to the person next to him and says, "Hey, how did your interview go? Last time we talked, you said you were nervous about it," and something shifts. The person he's talking to pauses for a second, almost surprised, then smiles in a way that's noticeably different from before, more genuine, more open. Because someone remembered. That small moment lands in a way that no post ever could. And here's where things get interesting. One person at that table is technically sharing the night with hundreds, maybe thousands of people online, capturing it, documenting it, broadcasting it in real time. But the other person, he's the one who's actually there. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, fully present. And that contrast raises a question that's becoming more relevant than ever. Why do some people feel almost no desire to share their lives online, while others feel a constant pull to document everything? At first, it might seem like a simple personality difference. Some people are more private. Others are more expressive. But if you look a little deeper, it's not quite that straightforward, because the decision to step away from social media, or to never fully engage with it in the first place, is rarely just about preference. Sometimes, it starts with something uncomfortable, not a philosophy, not a conscious lifestyle choice, but an experience. For some people, there was a moment when social media stopped feeling good. Maybe it was during a difficult period in their life, when things felt uncertain, messy, or overwhelming. And at the same time, their feed was filled with other people's highlight reels. Smiling faces, achievements, celebrations, carefully curated moments that made everything else look effortless. And without realizing it, the comparison begins. Not in a dramatic way, just small thoughts. Why does everyone else seem to have it together? Why does my life feel so different right now? Over time, that quiet comparison starts to take a toll. Or maybe it was something more direct. They shared something personal once. Something honest. Something that actually mattered to them. And it didn't land the way they expected. It was ignored. Or misunderstood. Or met with silence, and that kind of experience lingers. Because when you open up even a little, and it feels like no one really sees you, it creates a subtle form of withdrawal. Not loud, not obvious, just a quiet decision to pull back. For others, it might have been tied to a relationship, a breakup, a moment where posting something suddenly felt complicated, like everything had to be explained, interpreted, or managed. So instead of dealing with that pressure, they step away. Gradually at first, posting less, checking less, sharing less. Until one day, they realize they've almost disappeared from it entirely. And from the outside, it might look intentional. Even admirable. People might assume they're more disciplined, more self-aware, more above it all. But real life isn't that clean. Not everyone leaves social media because they've figured something out. Sometimes they leave because something didn't feel right anymore. Because something hurt. Because something didn't align. And that distinction matters, because it changes the way we understand what happens next. What does it actually feel like to step away? At first, it's not always peaceful. In fact, it can feel strangely empty. There's a kind of silence that replaces the constant stream of updates, notifications, and interactions. No quick check-ins. No immediate feedback. No sense of being seen in the casual, everyday way that social media provides. And that absence can feel uncomfortable, almost like withdrawal. You reach for your phone without thinking. Open apps out of habit. Scroll for a few seconds, then realize there's nothing pulling you in the way it used to. And for a while, it feels like something is missing. But then slowly, something begins to change. Not all at once. Just small shifts. Almost unnoticeable at first. And those shifts start to reshape the way you experience your own life. At first, the change is almost invisible. Nothing dramatic happens. There's no sudden clarity, no instant sense of peace. Just a gradual shift in how your attention moves throughout the day. You begin to notice how often your mind used to split itself half in the moment, half observing it, half experiencing something, half thinking about how it might look if it were shared. Without social media constantly in the background, that split starts to close. Moments feel more contained, more complete. You're no longer stepping outside of your own experience to evaluate it in real time. And that's when something subtle, but important, begins to take shape. Your attention starts returning to you. Not in a self-centered way, but in a grounded one. You listen a little more closely when someone speaks. You stay in conversations a bit longer, without the urge to check your phone. You begin to notice details that would have otherwise slipped past. Lump tone of voice, pauses, expressions. The natural rhythm of interaction. And with that, your relationships start to shift too. They become quieter, but deeper. Instead of spreading your attention across dozens or hundreds of people online, you begin investing it in a smaller number of real interactions. Fewer conversations, but ones that actually stay with you. You remember things people tell you. You follow up. You become more present, not because you're trying to be, but because there's nothing pulling you away. And that presence has weight. It's something people can feel, even if they can't quite explain it. But the biggest change doesn't happen in your relationships. It happens in how you relate to yourself. Because when you stop sharing your life, you also stop performing it. There's no invisible audience anymore. No quiet pressure to turn ordinary moments into something interesting or impressive. No need to frame your experiences in a way that will be understood, liked, or approved. You're no longer asking, even subconsciously, is this worth posting? Will people react to this? Does this look good enough? Instead, a different question starts to take its place. How does this actually feel? And that shift, simple as it sounds, changes everything. Because for a long time, social media trains us to see ourselves from the outside. We begin to measure our lives, not just by what we experience, but by how those experiences are perceived. We learn to curate, to adjust, to present. And over time, that creates a kind of distance between who we are and how we appear. But when that system disappears, even temporarily, that distance starts to collapse. You become less concerned with how things look and more aware of how they actually are. What you enjoy, what drains you, what matters, what doesn't. Your sense of identity becomes quieter, but also more stable, less dependent on feedback, less reactive, more internal. And something interesting happens when that internal stability grows. The urge to constantly share begins to fade. Not because you're forcing yourself to resist it, but because it no longer feels necessary. You don't feel the same pull to document every moment, to update people, to stay visible in the same way. It's not that you're hiding, and it's not that you think sharing is wrong. It just stops feeling like something you need. And when you reach that point, the idea of going back to constant posting can feel strangely exhausting. Not because it's difficult, but because it reintroduces something you've already let go of. The subtle pressure, the background noise, the feeling of being slightly outside your own life. And once you've experienced what it feels like to be fully inside it, it's hard to ignore that difference. But here's where it's important to stay honest. Not everyone who stays offline has reached that place. And not everyone who posts frequently is disconnected or unaware. This isn't a simple divide between better and worse. It's more nuanced than that. Some people are still in the middle of figuring things out, testing boundaries, moving in and out of different habits, learning what feels right for them. Others use social media in a way that genuinely adds value to their lives, creatively, professionally, or socially, without losing themselves in it. And some people who appear very private aren't necessarily at peace. They might just be protecting themselves, avoiding something, healing from something they haven't fully processed yet. So the difference isn't really about who posts and who doesn't. It's about what role it plays in your life. Is it something you control? Or something that quietly controls you? Because that's the part most people don't stop to examine. And maybe that's the real point of all this. Not to quit. Not to judge. Not to label one way as better than the other. But to notice where your attention goes. To notice how you feel before, during, and after you engage. To notice whether you're sharing because you want to, or because it feels like you should. Because the truth is, the most important parts of your life, the moments that actually shape you, change you, stay with you, don't need to be seen to be real. They don't become more meaningful because they're shared. If anything, sometimes they become more meaningful when they're not. And once you start to experience life that way, not as something to present, but as something to fully live, you may find yourself needing less validation, less visibility, less noise, not because you're rejecting the world, but because for the first time in a while, you're no longer standing outside your own life, watching it happen. You're finally inside it.